Q Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the National on Thursday the 8th of August, from the comments section. Chris Packham pens open letter to Wagamama over use of farmed salmon. This article is written by Ross Hunter. Chris Packham has penned an open letter to a restaurant chain challenging them over their use of farmed salmon. Last month, the BBC presenter and naturalist called on Wagamama to remove farmed salmon from its menus, branding the product as an environmental disaster. A petition urging the brand, which sells Japanese-inspired Asian food at more than 170 locations in the UK, to remove farmed salmon from their kitchens, received more than 100,000 signatures. It states that the use of fish meal from West Africa and European salmon farms was putting millions of people at risk of malnutrition due to the plundering of local fish populations along the African coast. Wagamama did not respond directly, either Packham, the environmental charity Wild Fish Scotland, or campaign group Feedback, who promoted the petition. However, they did release a statement responding to the claims made by the group, noting that they would be moving away from sourcing Norwegian farmed salmon. Yet the open letter signed by Packham, Wildfish and Feedback continues to challenge Wagamama's claims and continued use of farmed salmon. We are relieved to hear that you will be moving away from sourcing Norwegian salmon, given the industry's clear reliance on fish meal and fish oil sourced from West Africa and other vulnerable fisheries, it read. However, your proposed position to instead source farmed salmon from Scotland does not address our concerns or those of the over 100,000 people who signed our petition. We regret we still have not had any response from you to these concerns. Wagamama claimed that their salmon comes from Norwegian and Scottish suppliers that do not use feed from West Africa. Please could you provide a list of the Norwegian and Scottish companies that you have been sourcing from? We found in our Blue Empire report that the 4 big feed producers, Mowi, Skretting, Cargill and Biomar, supplied close to the 100% of the feed used in Norwegian salmon farming. All of them source fish oil from West Africa. The letter also takes issue with another Wagamama promise to only use Scottish salmon from RSPCA-approved farms. The vast majority of Scottish salmon farming is RSPCA-approved, yet there are many welfare and wider issues still endemic to Scottish salmon farming, it states. As set out by Wildfish in its report, Responsibly Farmed, the RSPCA Assured Standard, which claims to be welfare-led, sets no maximum mortality threshold limit, despite mortality being a recognised indicator for welfare performance. Consequently, Scottish farms reporting as many as 74% of its fish dying in a single month are still covered by the RSPCA Assured scheme. The number of fish deaths on Scottish salmon farms has increased dramatically in recent years, doubling between 2021 and 2022, and hitting a record high in 2023 of 16.5 million farmed salmon dying prematurely on the farms. The authors state that they will be escalating their concerns to Apollo Management Group, the US private equity group which owns Wagamama. Salmon farming has faced criticism in Scotland following reports of high mortality rates in many farms and concerns about its impact on the surrounding environment, as well as native salmon populations. Figures show that between January and November 2022, there were nearly 15 million salmon mortalities in Scotland. The Canadian province of British Columbia recently promised to ban the practice following outcry from First Nations people and environmental campaigners. A Wagamama spokesperson said, "Sustainability is at the heart of everything we do at Wagamama, including how we source from and work with our suppliers, which is why all our salmon is sustainably sourced from Scottish and Norwegian fisheries that do not use feed from West Africa. These fisheries are accredited by Global GAP, the world's leading standard for seafood farmed with care. They set strict requirements for responsible seafood farming that require producers to farm with care for fish, the environment, and the people on and around the farm. We regularly ensure that all our suppliers adhere to our strict sourcing policy, as well as conducting routine audits and site visits to verify compliance, traceability, and transparency. Our current procurement process means that by the end of 2024, all future Wagamama salmon will be sourced only from Scottish fisheries, which are in addition RSPCA accredited. At Wagamama, we believe in continual improvement and are always looking to expand our sustainability goals. The part we must play as a brand is extremely important, and the small decisions we can make can create big change, and whilst progress takes time, it begins with all of us." Jessica Sinclair Taylor, Deputy Director of Feedback, said, "Wagamama's move to Scottish farmed salmon does nothing to address the huge and systemic problems with the toxic salmon farming industry. Like their Norwegian counterparts, this is an industry plagued with mass mortalities, wasteful feeding practices, and an over-reliance on flawed certifications. If Wagamama are truly serious about treading more lightly on earth, they must take farmed salmon off the menu now." That article was written by Ross Hunter. This is from The National on Friday the 9th of August, from the news section. English riots gave me flashbacks to being hunted by trafficking gang, says refugee in Scotland. This article is written by Hamish Morrison. A refugee who fled Egypt against the threat of organ-harvesting kidnappers has said riots across England gave him flashbacks to the horrors he left behind in Africa. Glasgow University academic Hayab Johannes, 37, said far-right rioters across England were spreading terror as he accused the political establishment of emboldening them with policies including the now abandoned Rwanda deportation scheme and the hostile environment. Johannes, who is originally from Eritrea, said successive governments have created an environment where any person who feels like it can hunt refugees in the streets. He claimed asylum in the UK in 2015 after a 4-year ordeal which saw him flee his home country for a refugee camp in Khartoum, Sudan, from which he was kidnapped and taken to Egypt. In North Africa, he feared he would be trafficked to the Sinai Desert, where refugees were taken by smugglers who demanded ransoms, raped, and even harvested organs from their captives. "They wanted to take me to Sinai, but I managed to escape," said Johannes. "The desert itself was a torture camp. They can just put you there and leave. You can't leave, you can't go anywhere because it's just desert. You're going to die somewhere." But in a devastating statement, Johannes said the events of the past week have recalled the feeling of being hunted by traffickers and gangsters. He said that while the unrest which has gripped parts of England since the killing of 3 young girls in Southport, Merseyside, late last month, has so far failed to reach Scotland, it has upended the feeling of safety he has enjoyed in the UK. Johannes, who in 2021 completed a PhD at Glasgow University, where he is now a researcher, laid the blame for the riots at the door of the government and politicians. He said, "When you're creating a hostile environment for human beings, what does it mean? How human are these people for you?" And he blasted the media, which he said was parroting anti-migrant rhetoric from the state, helping to create the environment where we are now. Johannes said, "The things that are happening here are what the traffickers are doing in Cairo, in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Libya. That's what traffickers do. They just hunt people down, terror within the communities, and abduct or kidnap or whatever they can." He now lives in Hindland, Glasgow, with his wife and baby daughter, and says it is the best place for me since I left Eritrea. There are so many people who are really good, so many people who care a lot about other people, and so many people who don't even notice that you are different, that you are somebody from outside of this place, said Johannes. He praised scenes on Wednesday night, which saw massive anti-racist counter-protests hit the streets of England, averting further riots. They showed the different side of living in places like the UK, where the majority are very good people, said Johannes. That article was written by Hamish Morrison. This is from The National, on Friday the 9th of August, from the comments section. Kamala Harris's choice of Tim Walz as running mate is a refreshing change. This article is written by David Pratt. The international political landscape is a pretty bleak place right now. In the Middle East, tremendous trepidation remains as Israel, the region and indeed the world awaits a reaction from Iran and/or Hezbollah over the killing of 2 of its leaders. Meanwhile, in Asia, though scarcely making headlines, one of the world's wiliest autocrats, Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh, the country's longest-serving female head of state, has been dispatched by angry citizens, leaving this massive country of 170 million people in a dangerous political vacuum. So where then to look for some good news on the international front? Well, I'm going to stick my neck out and suggest, oddly enough, the United States. I say this after Kamala Harris's announcement that straight-talking Minnesotan Tim Walz would be her Democratic running mate for November's presidential election. It's probably fair to assume that other than to those with a special interest in American politics, Walz is not exactly a familiar figure. But among Americans themselves, it's a very different story, given that his background and demeanour are known to many voters there. That said, Harris's choice appears to have still surprised many in her party, who believed that the Governor Josh Shapiro, a centrist with high approval rating in the must-win state of Pennsylvania, would be a front-runner in the selection process. So why did Harris choose Walz? Well, to begin with, representing as he does a largely rural district in Minnesota, Walz helps create a bulwark against Republican attacks that Harris is a member of the Californian coastal elite. What Walz does well is win over rural voters. Unlike Shapiro, Walz admittedly doesn't bring instant recognition on the ticket in a swing state, but does make up for that with a background and manner that could well help Democrats peel voters away from Donald Trump, particularly in the Midwest. Walz is the first Democratic Vice President, VP, pick since 1964 not to go to law school, and who is part of the second consecutive Democratic ticket, after Biden-Harris in 2020, to not feature anyone with an Ivy League degree, something which hadn't happened since 1984. In short, he's been described as having a Midwestern nice appeal, even when being feisty on a speaking platform. This is a politician who's had a real life outside the hallowed halls of America's corridors of power. A candidate who has been a teacher, football coach, union organiser and Army National Guard sergeant, who possesses a folksy, colloquial manner, but who can still pack a punch with a candid turn of phrase. As Trump has shown, many Americans are fond of a straight talker, and for the years the Democrats have sought to undermine him using often high-minded political attacks. But on July the 23rd, 2 days after Joe Biden's withdrawal from the race, Walz, in a television interview, uttered a critique of the Republicans in his signature conversational manner, saying, "These guys are just weird." His jovial put-down was a godsend to the Harris campaign team, who sat up and took notice while social media did the rest. Quips like this, delivered in Walz's way, are what the Democrat campaign needs right now. But Walz brings other, more tangible political assets to Harris's campaign, perhaps the most important of which is he is loved by the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. "Don't ever shy away from our progressive values," he told attendees on a fundraising call in late July, adding that one person's socialism is another person's neighbourliness. It was a message that went down well, as does his position on the issue of abortion, one of the keynote issues in the coming election. On this, the two are totally in sync. As the New York Times highlighted a few days ago, Walz has a personal story here too. His 2 children were conceived through in vitro fertilization, the fertility treatment a few conservatives, including a majority of the Alabama Supreme Court, had hoped to ban. Along with Illinois, Walz's state of Minnesota has become a Midwestern haven for women from surrounding states with greater restrictions. After winning full control of Minnesota's State House in 2023, for the first time in a decade, Walz pushed through a raft of progressive laws and his state codified abortion rights. There are other more recently pressing issues too, in which he has stuck out from the pack, that will sit comfortably with Harris, Gaza being the most obvious. In contrast to Shapiro, his rival for VP pick, Walz has stayed relatively quiet on the issue of Gaza. While this might not please all, it's a far cry from Shapiro, who is a strong supporter of Israel and a critic of student encampments at universities across the US. Sensing a weakness here, Republicans of course have sought to accuse the Democrats of snubbing Shapiro because he is Jewish. But Walz's position on Gaza also provides clues as to his stance on a key area for a potential vice president, foreign policy. In a recent interview, he called out Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban as a dictator, in contrast to the Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance, who sees Orban as something of a role model. Some of Walz's views on foreign policy might be gleaned from a speech he gave in 2007, when he criticised the Bush administration for its focus on security and its neglect of international diplomacy. Every politician, of course, has their detractors and critics, and Walz is no exception. No doubt Republicans will do all they can to prise his vulnerabilities open, from Walz's delay in 2020 to send in the National Guard to quell riots in Minneapolis, to criticism and allegations by the state's independent legislative auditor that his administration mishandled money during the COVID pandemic. For the moment, the Trump campaign has attacked Walz as a radical leftist, and certainly there's little doubt that his choice as Harris's running mate has the Republicans twitchy. According to Mary Trump, the estranged niece of the former president, her uncle is terrified of Walz, who she described as a normal American who cares about helping other Americans. Whether voters agree remains to be seen, but so far Walsh seems to be going down well in the polls. I, for one, like the cut of his political jib, not least for the refreshing change he brings to American politics. That article was written by David Pratt. This is from The National, on Friday the 9th of August, from the news section. North Lanarkshire. Hepatitis A cases confirmed, Cumbernauld area. This article is written by Ross Hunter. Public health officials are investigating a small number of cases of hepatitis A in North Lanarkshire. NHS Lanarkshire said a few cases of the contagious liver infection have been found in the Cumbernauld area. The infection can range from a mild illness, which lasts a few weeks, to a severe form lasting several months. It tends to spread through contaminated food or water, or from close contact with an infected person. Symptoms include tiredness, joint pain, fever, loss of appetite, nausea and diarrhea, while infected individuals may also experience pain in the upper right stomach, rashes, jaundice, dark urine and pale feces, itchy skin and abdominal pain and swelling. Vaccinations are being offered to the contacts of people affected, and residents in the area are being urged to watch out for symptoms, although the illness is sometimes asymptomatic. Dr. Alison Smith-Palmer, public health consultant, said, "We are aware of a small number of cases of hepatitis A in the Cumbernauld area. We are working closely with the cases, their families and their close contacts, who, as a precautionary measure, are being offered the chance to get vaccinated against hepatitis A infection. The hepatitis A vaccine is a well-established, safe and effective vaccine which provides protection against infection to those who receive the vaccine and also helps protect people who may have other health conditions and may be at risk of severe illness if they become infected with hepatitis A. We are also asking the local residents in Cumbernauld to be aware of the symptoms and signs of hepatitis A infection, and if they are experiencing any symptoms or signs, to seek medical attention. There is no cure for hepatitis A, which will usually get better of its own within a couple of months, according to the NHS Inform website. However, it can occasionally last for many months, and in rare cases it can be life-threatening if it causes liver failure. More information is available on the NHS Inform website and from the NHS Lanarkshire Health Protection Team by phoning 01698 752 952. That's 01698 752 952. That article was written by Ross Hunter. This is from The National on Friday the 9th of August, from the Culture section. Scottish charity urges people to object to damaging Bannockburn development plans. This article is written by Adam Robertson. A conservation charity is urging people to defend this special place and write to the Scottish Government objecting to damaging plans for development at the Battle of Bannockburn site. We previously told how Stirling Council granted planning permission for a trotting track for harness racing, including buildings and a car park. The site is included in the inventory of historic battlefields, but is not owned by conservation charity National Trust for Scotland, NTS, which has a visitor centre and listed monuments nearby. NTS has already objected to the plans and has called on its more than 330,000 members and the public to lobby Scottish Government ministers to call in the decision, a move which would give ministers, and not Stirling Council, the final say on the planning application. During the battle in 1314, Robert the Bruce defeated English troops led by King Edward II, giving the site historic significance. Plans include parking for more than 200 cars on the site, and NTS said it was shocked and dismayed at the council's decision. Director of Conservation and Policy, Stuart Brooks, said, "We need as many people as possible to stand with us to defend this special place now and for the future." The fields in question are on the National Inventory of Historic Battlefields. Although they don't fall within the land owned and cared for by the Trust, they are within the boundaries of the 1314 conflict. They are integral to the experience of visitors who come to learn about this special aspect of Scotland's heritage. These fields are not just fields, but a living testament to the historical and cultural significance of the Battle of Bannockburn. If they are developed, we will not just lose a part of our history, but also a connection from the present to the past. The loss will be intolerable, and we will be left with a void in our heritage and a stain on our nation's reputation. If you agree that this important site of Scottish history should be protected from this damaging proposal, we are asking you to please write to Scottish ministers explaining why you think the battlefield is important, why this development is so damaging, its inappropriateness for the location, and finally asking that the decision is called in as a matter of urgency. Time is ticking on this. Scottish ministers have until August the 26th to make their decision. Please help us ensure that they understand how strongly the public feel about protecting this important place. NTS described the site as in the vicinity of where Bruce's army faced off against the vanguard of Edward's army on the first day of the battle, and said that the proposals would destroy one of the last remaining areas of open landscape on which the historic battle took place in 1314. Plans would fundamentally alter the experience of the site. Traffic could result in an elevated risk of collision on the main road, endangering residents and visitors, while crowd noise would greatly detract from the visitor experience at a nationally important historic site, conservationists from NTS warned. It said the development would be a stain on our nation's reputation. Ministers have until August the 26th to make a decision, and the charity urged members to email scottish.ministers@gov.scot with concerns. A Stirling Council spokesperson said, "The panel carefully considered all information relating to the planning application in making its decision. As the Scottish Government has already issued a direction in respect of this application, it would not be appropriate to comment further at this time." A Scottish Government spokesperson said, "We understand that the Stirling Council is minded to approve the proposal for the trotting track. The application will be notified to ministers, who will decide whether or not to call it in for their own determination." That article was written by Adam Robertson.
From the National, Sunday, 11th August 2024. From the news section. Scottish far-right will try to use English riots to aid recruitment. This article is written by James L. Walker. Scottish far-right groups will do their level best to use the violence and unrest seen in England and Northern Ireland to help recruit new members, an expert has said. The far-right violence seen in parts of the UK has not spread to Scotland yet, with some, including Professor John Curtis, suggesting that this may be due to the issue of migration being generally less polarizing in Scottish politics. But racism evidently still exists in Scotland, as do far-right groups, from the Homeland Party to Active Club Scotland. David Lawrence, a researcher for Hope Not Hate, the UK's leading campaign group against the far-right, said he's a bit surprised far-right unrest hasn't occurred in Scotland, given it doesn't take many people for it to kick it off. I think maybe there's a slight worry in Scotland's far-right groups given the level of violence that has happened in parts of England and Northern Ireland, he said. They obviously want to keep a distance from that. The Sunday National has looked into the main Telegram groups for several of the groups and also found calls for no violence. Instead, there appears to be an emphasis on using the momentum from the riots to help with the wider radical right movement. Multiple Telegram posts from the Homeland Party, a far-right group which calls for ethnic, ancestral and cultural unity in the UK, call for people to join the group. Active Club Scotland, which Hope Not Hate describes as a fascist martial arts club, has also recently called for people to join, whilst highlighting the violence in England. Patriotic Alternative, the UK's most active far-right group, has produced flyers of the back of the riots. They'll certainly do their level best to recruit off the back of the violence, said Lawrence. The researcher cast doubt on whether ACS would go very far recruitment-wise, as they look to be a kind of small elite unit. But referring to Homeland specifically, he said they'll try to present themselves as the common sense view of the majority, whereas of course they're not. They're still a very, very small group, incredibly fringe. They're a fascist group, but they will obscure that in their output. Nice euphemistic language. Lawrence was keen to stress, however, that while groups like Homeland are extreme and do pose a risk in a number of ways, we shouldn't overly inflate their influence. Perhaps there's a risk that they will be able to recruit more, but they're still fringe, so it's difficult to say. Since registering as a party, they had a small boost, I think, in membership. It doesn't seem at the moment that like this has translated into a wider activist base in any big sense. Lawrence added, and this may well be the case with this current movement. We've been talking for years about a kind of wider anti-migrant upswell in some sections of society and Homeland to attempt to harness that, but not always entirely successfully. This article is written by James L. Walker. From the National, Sunday, 11th August 2024. From the Politics section. Ruth Wishart, Time to End Long Tradition of Blaming Immigrants. This article has been written by Ruth Wishart. When one of the UK's most reliably anti-migrant right-wing publications published a front page last week in praise of people prepared to stand up for decency and against thuggery, it would have been tempting to think an important corner has been turned. Tempting but premature. As both the police and the new UK government warned, the Bamford tendency may be temporarily in retreat, but they and their enablers are still with us, still a prey to all kinds of misinformation and manipulation. It's especially important that we Scots don't imagine we have some kind of special immunity because the riots have largely happened in English cities and the well-established tinderbox that is Northern Ireland. Two things have to be borne in mind. We do not have boatloads of would-be asylum seekers traveling up the Clyde, Forth and Tay, and as a country we have a greater demographic need for new blood than any other nation of the UK, which brings us to one of the most ludicrous actions of Rishi Sunak's government. In attempting to stem the tide of what his party's right wing alleged was uncontrolled immigration, they took two fateful steps. The first was to stop the relatives of people studying in Britain, including spouses and children, from joining the usually graduate student, and the second was to impose similar measures on health and social care recruits. The results, as we saw from this last week's statistics, were all too predictable. Already struggling universities became less attractive as an educational destination, and the health and social care sector, already boasting way too many vacancies, pushed the UK well down the list of desirable workplaces. A strange way, you might think, to construct the long-promised new social care revolution. The other intervention came from Labour's London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who gave us a glimpse of the bleeding obvious by flagging up the part played by social media platforms in spreading fear and loathing. England's upcoming Online Safety Act was not fit for purpose, he added, and needed swift amendments. All true, of course, but there's no silver bullet available. The heart sinks on hearing that Ofcom has been charged with drawing up appropriate legislation. They'll be the regulator which still thinks GB News is a fit and proper broadcaster, despite being presented by an array of failed Tory ministers whose idea of rigor is to interview each other. When I sat on what came to be known as the Maclifson inquiry, we wrestled long and hard with the conundrum of regulating internet-based sources of information, given their standard defense of not being publishers in the same sense as newspapers and terrestrial broadcasters are. The new legislation envisages big fines targeting the transgressors. It does not explain what happens when the giants in that marketplace merely raise one or two digits in response to being judged, depending on the location of the legislature in question. I doubt Ofcom enjoys the same muscle or legal army as the big bad boys who run social media, one of whom felt able to allege, from his base many thousands of miles distant, that the UK was on the cusp of civil war. A strange silence ensued when thousands of ordinary citizens showed up instead to urge rioters to get a life, preferably some elsewhere. It has been suggested in several quarters that if the riot boys show up in Glasgow, the citizenry should likewise attend and demonstrate more acceptable forms of solidarity. The kinds of action that might allay some of the fears both Khan and Hamza Yusuf have expressed about the ability of their own children to grow up without fear or prejudice. I get the intention, but I think the best weaponry to deploy might be to ignore the Bover boys from a great height. My guess is they'd hate that just as the nice Donald Trump can't bear the spotlight to be turned elsewhere. Plus, that unsavory lot are nakedly spoiling for a fight. Let's not give them one. Let's have their collars felt instead and frog march to cool their heads in a cop shop. There's not much obviously patriotic about burning out advice centers and looting community stores. I note in passing that a lot of folk are spitting tax at their being described as protesters rather than agitators and rioters. Fair enough, but we might reflect at this juncture that they had been protesting about climate change. They would be housed at His Majesty's pleasure for rather longer. We do seem sometimes to have a cockeyed sense of judicial priorities, like when people outraged at the carnage in Gaza to take to the streets only to be described by some politicians as a hate march. Like last week, when former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick suggested that anyone shouting Allahu Akbar out loud should also be arrested. It translates as God is great, apparently. Would you lock up someone shouting that? We have to find a way of weeding out those in our multicultural society who are radicalized and dangerously malign from those who thought the UK was a place where anyone could practice their religion of choice, given that for many Muslims, faith is a way of life rather than a once a week drop in. Ditto the most observant Jews. It's difficult for those of us without a faith and with white skin to appreciate the day to day fears of our brown and black skinned fellow citizens. Given the level of still present misogyny, being a woman of color must be to get the worst kind of double up. Yusuf, our former First Minister, self describes as being as Scottish as you can get. Yet he also says how fearful he is for his immediate and extended family. That should shame us all, as it should when his Labour opponent, Anas Sarwar, is judged not for his contribution to his country of birth, but for his colour, religion, and antecedents. Being a mongrel nation, which we assuredly are, should be a badge of national honor, not a cause for social division. Generations ago, my forebears were apparently kicked out of France. This has given me zilk facility with the language, although I do have a Dian/PF earworm since the start of the Paris Olympics. The other day, a Shetlander complained loud and long on the radio 4 airwaves about the measly sum handed over to Scotland when these particular Northern Isles, along with Orkney, were given over as part of Margaret of Denmark's dowry. So ended a long association with both Norway and Denmark, though it happened 550 years ago rather than last week, as you might have jealous from the broadcaster's undimmed outrage. It is a long and ignoble tradition for people throughout the British Isles to blame all their ills on whatever wave of migration was last experienced. We imprisoned Scots, Italians in the last war, and well into the 20th century were still advertising that the Irish need not apply for vacancies. One young writer last week said his indignation stemmed from immigrants taking his job. He was unemployed, he explained, and couldn't get a start. What about your criminal record? Asked the interviewer. What's that got to do with it? The chap responded. Quite a lot, young sir, I guess. That and the fact of your blatant racism. People like Nigel Farage, who complain about migrants being held in hotels, might like to reflect that they are barred from working, not because they have a criminal record, niche, but because they're stuck in an endless queue to have their application for leave to remain processed. If that's successful, they can apply for work and not at all incidentally pay tax. This article is written by Ruth Wishart.
From the National, Monday the 12th of August, from the Culture section, Glasgow, Pizza Restaurant of the Year opens new location. Article written by Rebecca Newlands. A restaurant named Pizza Restaurant of the Year has opened a new location in Glasgow. Rock Villa first opened on Postle Road in the Portland-Ass area of the city 5 years ago, and now it has expanded its offerings and will operate from 2 venues. Known as Rock Villa East, the second eatery is now open at Tullis Street near Glasgow Green. The restaurant, named as the best for pizza in Scotland and at the Scottish Restaurant Awards 2024, now want to celebrate and involve their customers. Speaking to Glasgow Live, Jim McLaughlin of Rock Villa said, "We have just turned 5, so what better way to celebrate than bring our fresh, authentic pizzas to even more people in the city centre? We're really proud of what we do. The love and respect is poured into every pizza we make. We treasure every slice and we hope you will too. It's the Rock Villa way." The Rock Villa team also teased that more pizzerias could be coming to the city very soon, and they have launched a deal where customers can get a free margherita pizza if they spend £15. McLaughlin added, "We want to celebrate the new place, plus the 5th birthday and winning the Best Pizza Restaurant in Scotland award. It's been a good summer so far, despite the weather. We have massive plans. Look out for Rock Villa West and Rock Villa South coming soon. For now, we are delivering to as much of the city centre as possible and the East End, and, of course, our original spot has seating for a restaurant experience, award-winning too. To receive a free pizza, order online at rockvilla.pizza and enter the code ROCK5FREE. And the article was written by Rebecca Newlands and read by me, Ian McKenna. From the National, Monday the 12th of August, from the Culture section, exclusive. Michelle Shaughnessy on using Ozempic ahead of Edinburgh Fringe show. Article written by Lucy Jackson. A comedian bringing her second show to the Edinburgh Fringe has opened up about her experience with weight loss medication and the importance of using comedy as an outlet. Acclaimed Canadian comic Michelle Shaughnessy talks about her use of the weight loss drug Ozempic in her show Too Late Baby at this year's Fringe. Ozempic is an injection typically used to manage blood sugar levels in people with type 2 diabetes. It has quickly become one of the most popular weight loss drugs, with pharmacies prescribing it off-label, meaning it is not prescribed for its original intended use for those seeking to lose weight. The use of Ozempic as a weight loss drug has led to a national shortage of the medication, with supply chain issues expected to continue throughout 2024. Shaughnessy has taken Wegovy since December 2022. It is the same medication as Ozempic, sold under a different brand name. She started taking it after struggling with a complex relationship with her own weight. A couple of years ago, when I moved here, I gained a bunch of weight that I had lost previously, Shaughnessy told The National. My weight's always gone up and down. I was bullied all through school. I think it was worse in the noughties when I was coming of age. You couldn't even be a little bit chubby, you couldn't even look just healthy without being teased. That always stuck with me, and I saw myself gaining the weight back and it really stressed me out, so I started Ozempic in Christmas 2022. Shaughnessy acknowledged that there was debate about the use of Ozempic to treat weight loss, but had talked to her supplier before she started taking it to address any of her concerns. I do want to acknowledge that it's maybe not the healthiest for everyone, and it is important to talk to your doctor before you do it, which I didn't because it is very easy to get online. Shaughnessy's relationship with Ozempic comes through in our new show, which started its run in the Fringe on Saturday. When I first started writing my show, I was really unapologetic about it. I was maybe too jokey about it. She says, as time goes on, I'm definitely realising that it's probably something I'm not going to want to be on forever. It's a good tool for a lot of people, but I think it's very easy to become obsessed when you already have that kind of history with weight and body image. That started to happen to me, and that's when I realised I should really reassess and rethink, and I talk about that in my show. Shaughnessy moved from Canada to the UK in 2022, when she also brought her debut show, Be Your Own Daddy, to the Edinburgh Fringe. The experience of performing in Scotland came as a shock, as she had never had a reviewer coming to her show before. Where I'm from, in Toronto, we have one reviewer that reviews everything. From them to be able to come out and do comedy is very rare, Shaughnessy said. The whole point of reviews just isn't something we're used to. Now I see that there's all this stuff I didn't realise goes into comedy shows that everyone makes here. That was definitely a bit overwhelming because it was the first time that I knew I was going to have people reviewing me. As well as diving into her relationship with Ozempic, Too Late Baby also explores Shaughnessy's thoughts on growing older and not achieving everything she had set out to do. Comedy helps me not be alone with those thoughts. It helps me to feel like I have an outlet, she told The National. It also buys me some time until I actually have to deal with my problems in life, because writing jokes about my problems makes me feel like I'm dealing with them. I just don't want all the stuff I've gone through to have been for nothing, and I think if I don't make it into a show or make it funny, then I'll just feel like I've let that stuff win. She hopes her audience will leave the show knowing that it's okay to be unhappy. Life isn't perfect, we're all going to make mistakes, Shaughnessy said. I do think it's possible to be grateful for your life and also unappreciative of some things that have happened in it. Michelle Shaughnessy, Too Late Baby, is on at the Underbelly, Bristol Square, Daisy, August 9th to 11th, 13th to 25th at 2:45pm. Tickets are available at www.tickets.edfringe.com, and that article was written by Lucy Jackson. From The National, Wednesday the 14th of August, from the Culture section, Declan McKenna review, Edinburgh Playhouse gig was perfect end to tour, by Lucy Jackson. Going to a gig in a theatre is definitely a weird experience. There's the awkwardness of the seating arrangement to contend with, alongside the feeling that you can't quite let loose in the same way you might be able to at any other venue. Plus, being able to get ice cream during the interval, in this case the 20 minutes between the support and main acts, feels all kinds of illegal. Sandwiched in between performances of various musicals and stand-up comedy shows, Declan McKenna concluded his What Happened to the Beach tour at the Edinburgh Playhouse on Monday as part of the Edinburgh International Festival. It's much more typical to see McKenna perform in a crowded, muddy field than in a 95-year-old decadent theatre, donned with singing cherub statues. It's a bit of a tone shift from his performance at Boardmasters just 2 days earlier, or playing at Glasgow's Transmit in July. But the indie singer-songwriter puts the audience at ease from the minute he walks on stage, acknowledging the oddness of the situation as he dons binoculars originally intended for theatre goers to get a better view of the stage, remarking, "It's a good job you have seats. Edinburgh is one hilly F*** ing city." There was a kind of sadness to the opening of the show, as McKenna said it marked the end of an era for his latest album released back in February. He has toured the album with over 50 shows worldwide, including at the O2 Academy, Glasgow in March. Concluding in Edinburgh, he showcased his most recent sound with tracks such as Sympathy, Nothing Works, Mezzanine, and The Phantom Buzz kick in. Going into the gig, I wasn't too sure how this would go down with the audience. His hardcore fanbase is particularly loyal to his older material, with Brazil and British bombs forming staple crowd pleasers at each show. To my surprise, everyone around me knew the words to every single song. The whole evening felt like one giant euphoric dance party. All theatre etiquette had been thrown out by the end of the first song. This was true even for McKenna. Whilst he maintained some level of decorum by occasionally looking at the audience through his pair of theatre binoculars, by the end of the gig he was standing on top of a seat in the stalls screaming along with the crowd. Yet the real highlight of the show was when McKenna took to the stage alone during the encore, debuting his cover of ABBA's Slipping Through My Fingers to a live audience. It's a song which is featured heavily on his social media, after posting a cover on TikTok which went viral last year, but to see him perform it live for the first time was truly special. It was the perfect way to mark the end of an era, by turning the page and offering something new. While somewhat haunting and melancholy, it also offered a hopeful glance at what the future might have to have in store for McKenna. Although the setlist and the venue shouldn't go together on paper, it really worked. The album might have taken its final bow, but whatever comes next for McKenna is sure to be just as exciting. And the article was written by Lucy Jackson. From the National, Wednesday the 14th of August, from the Culture section. Scottish restaurant with stunning views over the Forth to shut after 18 years. Report by Claire Buchanan. A popular Aberdour eatery is to close next month, its owner has confirmed. The Room with a View restaurant at Hawkcraig Point, which is a stunning location overlooking the Forth, will close on September 28th. Making the announcement on Facebook, owner Hannah Norman said she had come to the decision with a heavy heart. She stated, "After 18 wonderful years, this decision has not come lightly. The business has been a significant part of my life and a cherished establishment for many in our community. I would like to take this opportunity to express my deepest gratitude to all of our staff members, both past and present. Your hard work, dedication and passion have made Room with a View a place of joy and celebration, and I am incredibly proud of what we've accomplished together. Unfortunately, the current economic climate has posed numerous challenges for the hospitality industry, and we have faced many financial constraints that have made it increasingly difficult to operate. Additionally, my personal circumstances have led me to prioritise family at this time." Norman thanked her loyal customers for their support over the years. "We have had the privilege of serving countless loyal customers. You have made our restaurant a vibrant part of this community," she added. "We will carry fond memories of the laughter, celebrations and special moments shared within our walls. This closure marks the end of an era, but I remain hopeful for the future. Thank you once again for everything." And the article was written by Claire Buchanan. From the National, Wednesday the 14th of August, from the Culture section. Stonehenge. 6-ton altar stone came from Scotland, research finds. By Xander Elihards, content editor. The largest altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge is actually Scottish, not Welsh, research suggests. The remarkable discovery has left experts stunned and busts a century-long held belief about the origins of the blue stone at the centre of the prehistoric monument. It is unclear when the stone arrived at the site in Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, but the scientists say it may well have been placed within the central horseshoe of the stones during the second construction phase at about 2620 to 2480 BC. It is also not known whether the new horizontal and partially buried stone once stood upright. The new discovery implies that one of the most famous stones in the world was moved much further than had been believed, at least 435 miles. For the last century, the 6-ton sandstone at the heart of the ancient site was believed to have come from Wales, As a majority of Stonehenge's bluestones came from the Preseli Hills area in West Wales and are believed to have been the first stones erected at the site. The stone at the focus of this study has traditionally been grouped with these other smaller bluestones. However, the true origin of the altar stone had remained a mystery until now. After work to examine the stone's chemical composition and mineral grains, scientists can say with 95% confidence that the sandstone is very likely to have come from the northeast of Scotland. The study involved scientists at Aberystwyth University, University College London and, in Australia, Curtin University and the University of Adelaide. The findings indicate a striking similarity between the Old Red Sandstone of the Arcadian Basin, which extends into Caithness and Moray in northeast Scotland, and the Stonehenge altar stone. Co-author Professor Richard Bevins from Aberystwyth University said, "These findings are truly remarkable. They overturn what had been thought for the past century. We have succeeded in working out, if you like, the age and chemical fingerprints of, perhaps, one of the most famous of stones in the world, renowned ancient monument. It's thrilling to know that our chemical analysis and dating work has finally unlocked this great mystery. We can now say that this iconic rock is Scottish and not Welsh. Although we can say that much and confidently, the hunt will still very much be on to pin down where exactly in the northeast of Scotland the altar stone came from. The scientists used their analysis of the ages of the mineral grains in the stone to essentially create a fingerprint of the source of those grains. They matched ages found in rocks of the Arcadian Basin found in the northeast of Scotland and are completely different from Welsh source stones. Anthony Clark, from the Timescales of Mineral Systems group at Curtin University, in Perth, Western Australia, said, "Considering the technological constraints of the Neolithic, our findings raise fascinating questions about how such a massive stone was able to be transported over the vast distance implied. Given major overland barriers en route from northeast Scotland to Salisbury Plain, marine transport is one feasible option." Commenting on the findings, he added, "All four of us were stunned. We couldn't believe it." Co-author Dr. Robert Eitzer of the UCL Institute of Archaeology said, "This is a genuinely shocking result, but if plate tectonics and atomic physics are correct, then the altar stone is Scottish. The work prompts two important questions. Why and exactly how was the altar stone transported from the very north of Scotland, a distance of more than 700 kilometres, to Stonehenge? The research, published in the journal Nature, does not provide direct evidence about how the stone got to its world-famous location in Wiltshire. But the revelation that it travelled so far will raise questions about its journey given the limits of human technology during Neolithic times. The altar stone is classed as a bluestone, but is very different from the other ones at Stonehenge. It is about twice the size of the smaller igneous bluestones, weighs 6 tonnes and is about 5 metres long, while the others are with a maximum of 3 tonnes. Professor Nick Pearce from Aberystwyth University said, "This stone has travelled an awful long way, at least 700 kilometres, and this is the longest recorded journey for any stone used in a monument at that period. The distance travelled is astonishing for the time. While the purpose of our new empirical research was not to answer the question of how it got there are obvious physical barriers to transporting by land, but a daunting journey if going by sea. There is no doubt that this Scottish source shows a high level of societal organisation in the British Isles during the period. These findings will have huge ramifications for understanding communities in Neolithic times, their levels of connectivity and their transport systems. Hopefully, people will now start to look at the altar stone in a slightly different context in terms of how and when it got to Stonehenge and where it came from. I'm sure this will lead to some new thinking about the development of Stonehenge and its links to the rest of Neolithic Britain." And the article was written by Xander Eliards and read by me, Ian McKennell.
The National News on Wednesday the 14th of August. Edinburgh Trams workers back strike action over the lack of toilet breaks. An article written by Lucy Jackson. Workers on Edinburgh's tram network have voted to back strike action in a dispute over a lack of toilet breaks. Members of Unite the Union have voted overwhelmingly in favour of strike action. More than 90% of tram workers balloted, meaning more than 160 workers could take action in a matter of weeks. The union said late running services mean that drivers are unable to take a break ahead of their next departure, which has led to health issues among members. The trade union represents drivers, ticket service assistants, controllers and vehicle maintenance workers. Sharon Graham, General Secretary of Unite, said, Unite's Edinburgh tram workers have emphatically backed strike action in order to tackle head-on the unacceptable health and safety situation that they face. They should not be in this situation because Edinburgh trams should be implementing measures to ensure that our members get their comfort breaks. We will back our tram membership all the way in the fight for decent workplace conditions. Lynn Turner, an industrial officer at the union, added, Edinburgh's tram workers are being forced into taking strike action. This is mismanagement, plain and simple, and it's having unacceptable consequences for our members. Unite wants to resolve this through negotiation, but we are running out of track before strike action takes place. If this happens, then Edinburgh trams will be solely to blame for any disruption. Management has one more chance. Edinburgh Trams has been approached for comment. An article written by Lucy Jackson. The National News on Wednesday the 14th of August. Twins dress rehearsal as school start looms. An article written by Laura Pollock. 10 sets of twins are set to start primary school in one area of Scotland, marking the 4th consecutive year the twin count has hit double figures. Dubbed Twinverclyde for its high volume of twins, the 20 children will start at various schools across Inverclyde on Friday. The council's twins record was set in 2015, when 19 sets began primary school. This year marks the 4th in a row of 10 or more sets of twins starting primary 1 in Inverclyde, with double figures in 10 out of the last 12 years. 6 of the 10 pairs of twins starting school this week gathered at St Patrick's Primary in Greenock yesterday, greeted by Provost Drew Mackenzie. He said, "You know it's back to school time when we start to see this year's inductees to our Twinverclyde Hall of Fame. It's become an annual tradition to get our new Primary 1 twins together, and it's great fun for them and their family and friends, and they all look so resplendent in their uniforms. For most, it's a dress rehearsal for Friday when it's back to the classroom for staff and pupils here in Inverclyde." The class of 2024 will take the Inverclyde twin count to 157 sets since 2013, which is an average of 13 sets each year. The lowest since 2013 was in 2018, when just 4 pairs of twins began school. Teachers are due to return to Inverclyde schools today. An article written by Laura Pollock. The National Politics on Wednesday the 14th of August. Liz Truss storms off stage after led by donkeys lettuce banner stunt. An article written by Lucy Jackson. Liz Truss has stormed off stage at a speaking event after a hilarious stunt which saw a banner with a lettuce appear while she was talking. The former Prime Minister, whose disastrous mini-budget tanked the economy, was speaking at an event to promote her book when the stunt took place. However, as she was speaking about her support for former US President and presidential candidate Donald Trump, a banner depicting a lettuce with googly eyes which said, "I crashed the economy," was slowly lowered from the ceiling. "I support Trump and I want him to win. I think that he probably will win," Ms Truss said, as the banner appeared directly above her. Ms Truss was initially unaware that the banner had appeared, but on seeing it she remarked, "That's not funny." She then stormed off stage. The lettuce is in reference to a challenge set by the Daily Star newspaper in October 2022 to see if Ms Truss's premiership could outlast the shelf life of a head of iceberg lettuce. The iceberg lettuce won, with Ms Truss lasting just 49 days in office. Political campaign group led by donkeys claimed credit for the stunt, posting a video to social media with the caption, "Liz Truss is on a pro-Trump speaking tour. so we dropped a strategically positioned, remote-controlled lettuce banner. This is not the first time that Led by Donkeys have pulled off something like this. A similar stunt took place earlier this year as the group disrupted a speech by Reform UK leader Nigel Farage using a remote-controlled banner with a picture of the Russian president, which read, "I love Nigel." An article written by Lucy Jackson. The National, on Wednesday the 14th of August. Opinion. Catalonia shows that there is no quick wheeze to independence. A column written by Seamus Logan. It feels a generation ago that Carles Puigdemont was forced into exile following his effort to declare Catalonian independence. The former president hit the news again last week by making a return to Barcelona to address independent supporters as a new Catalan government was sworn in. The right to self-determination belongs to the people, he told those gathered. Catalonia must be allowed to decide its future. And with that, he disappeared from right beneath the noses of the police officers under orders to arrest him. If his objective was to offer some morale-boosting theatre and to rile the muscular unionists of Spain, then it was mission accomplished. But for all that's happened since 2017, Catalonia remains firmly within the Spanish state, with no obvious route to achieving independence. Minus the interest of the judiciary, this might all sound a bit familiar to the ears of Scotland's independence supporters. Whatever parallels can be drawn, though, Scotland and Catalonia are very different, both in historical claim and legal situation, as well as recent political history. Nowhere is that more obvious than with the differences in the constitutional assumptions made by each central government. Firstly, Spain has a written constitution. The UK does not. Also, the 1978 Spanish Constitution refers to what its architects saw as the indissoluble unity of the Spanish state. Contrast this with the competing ideas of Scottish popular sovereignty versus English parliamentary sovereignty, and the fact that the UK state has no similar assertion of unity for itself written anywhere in law. But just because the UK Union exists on an assumption of consent, passive or otherwise, it doesn't mean there's any quick political wheeze that's going to get Scotland out of it. Regarding how we move on from here politically, I'm more concerned in grappling with the future than in contesting the past. However, what should be able to unite everyone is the principle that for Scotland to become independent, a means which can command both internal and external legitimacy is required. And that can only happen when there is the unambiguous consent of a majority of Scottish voters for independence. Here's where it gets trickier. As much as it sticks in the craw to acknowledge, no matter how often we assert that the people of Scotland are sovereign, as the Catalan example shows, it cuts no ice with the rest of the world unless the process we follow is also recognised and accepted by the UK government. So the key question that needs answered is surely this. If the UK Union is based on consent, how then can that consent be withdrawn? It's a question that gets to the heart of the democratic principle of the right of Scotland to self-determination. Crucially, it's a question that the leadership of the unionist parties will fail to answer at their longer-term electoral peril. The good news is that we are not the only people on these islands asking that question. Just as Brexit reanimated the independence question after what looked like a generational setback in 2014, it's also given a new dimension to the question of Northern Ireland's place in the Union and how it too might leave the UK if a majority emerges which wishes to do so. As someone from County Antrim who has long called Aberdeenshire home, I need no reminding of the many differences between Scotland and Northern Ireland. However, there are parts of the Good Friday Agreement relating to Northern Ireland's political status which make very interesting reading in a Scottish context too. Firstly, the agreement recognises that it is for the people of Ireland alone to exercise their right of self-determination on the basis of consent. Secondly, it commits the Secretary of State to organise a referendum if at any time it appears likely to them that a majority of those voting in Northern Ireland would express a wish that it should cease to be part of the United Kingdom. It then goes on to clarify that any such vote would be decided on a simple majority, and that if any such poll is held, there needs only to be an interval of 7 years before another can be held. In other words, the same amount of time that has elapsed since Mr. Puigdemont last addressed a crowd in person in Catalonia. I believe Holyrood should have the power to hold a future vote on independence, whether a Westminster government agrees with doing so or not. But I'm not too fussy about the means of getting that vote. It's far more important that we get it, and that when we do, we manage to persuade a majority to give us their support this time round. Challenging the Westminster parties to concede the principle of consent in letting Scotland determine its own democratic future points the way. But as in Northern Ireland, it's a principle which will only have useful effect when we also have sufficient numbers consistently backing a change to the status quo. Just like their having continued unfettered access to the EU single market, if being free to choose your own future is good enough for folk in Northern Ireland, it's good enough for folk in Scotland too. A column written by Seamus Logan, who is the SNP MP for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East. The National News on Wednesday the 14th of August. Scotland to Europe ferry could return at the start of 2025 with government help. An exclusive article written by James Walker. A ferry connecting Scotland to mainland Europe could be reinstated in 2025 if the Scottish or UK government help with start-up funding, according to the shipping expert behind the project. It comes after plans for the route, 3 return sailings per week from Rosyth to the French port of Dunkirk, had to be put on hold in January due to a lack of financial support from both Westminster and Holyrood. Ferry operator DFDS said at the time that this lack of commitment made the business case for the route less viable. Now, Derek Sloan of Ptarmigan Shipping has told The National that DFDS and other key stakeholders, including the Port of Rosyth and the Port of Dunkirk, are still fully committed to try and get the service running by the end of the first quarter of 2025. He added that he had recently approached both governments and had had a positive response so far, and believes that the new UK government, as well as the Scottish Parliament returning from recess, should see more enthusiasm for the project. Douglas Chapman, who championed the project during his time as MP for Dunfermline, blamed Westminster for funding obstacles last month, telling the Courier, "Had we not had years of austerity, this is something the SNP government would be keen to support." But Mr Sloan stressed that the route isn't looking to be subsidised and that it's not a lot of funding. "It's nothing to do with subsidies. We're looking for start-up infrastructure funding," he said. It's a better approach and one that they're looking more favourably on now. Now, local MSP Alex Rowley, who is Scottish Labour's transport spokesperson, has called on the UK and Scottish governments to fully investigate the proposal, stating that this needs to be driven at a government level. Commenting, Mr Rowley said, "I was delighted to meet with Derek Sloan of Ptarmigan Shipping Limited to find out more about the proposals being put forward by him and key stakeholders, DFDS Shipping Denmark, the Port of Rosyth and the Port of Dunkirk, to deliver a new shipping route for freight and passengers from Rosyth to Dunkirk. Given the potential economic, environmental and tourism benefits this new service could bring, it's crucial that both the UK and Scottish governments come together, work together and fully investigate the proposal's viability. If the proposal is indeed viable and deliverable, this project has the potential to generate significant economic growth for Scotland and is already being supported by stakeholders in the freight industry and the tourism sector. One of the major barriers to the success of this route would be the level of infrastructure needed to fulfil post-Brexit border force requirements, and I believe one way both the UK and Scottish governments could support this project, if deemed viable, would be exploring alternative solutions to these issues, such as the use of existing facilities at other sites. I've written to both the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Fiona Hislop MSP, and the Secretary of State for Scotland, Ian Murray MP, to request meetings to discuss this proposal further and what our two governments can do to drive this proposal forward, properly interrogate what is being proposed and ensure that there is a sustainable future for this ferry route. Ferries stopped sailing between Rosyth and the Belgian port of Zeebrugge 6 years ago, and the last that carried passenger services and not just freight was in 2010. Currently, Scots need to travel down to Newcastle if they want to take a ferry to mainland Europe. The Scottish and the UK governments have been approached for comment. An exclusive article written by James Walker. The National News on Wednesday, the 14th of August. Scotsman staff have no confidence in publishers' strategy following cuts. An article written by Gregor Young. Journalists at The Scotsman have told senior management at the paper's owner National World that they have no confidence in the publisher's business strategy. It follows a round of cuts at the Edinburgh-based title earlier this month. In a letter to Claire Jackson, head of HR at National World, the letter warned, "This title has so far outlived all its former owners. It cannot die a death of 1,000 cuts due under its current custodians." When the latest round of 5 redundancies was announced, the National Union of Journalists passed a motion expressing anger and dismay, calling on editor Neil McIntosh to meet with editorial staff to explain the need for the cuts. The NUJ say he refused to do so in his reply, and that he was focused on the redundancy process and restructuring. The letter added, if he cannot take responsibility for these cuts and look his staff in the eye, someone must. We ask that it be you. The NUJ says that a quarter of the paper's newsroom has been put at risk of redundancy, and that roles to be cut include the health, environment and property correspondents. The letter continues, at a time when 94% of Scots have indicated that they see Scotland's natural environment as very important or quite important to both Scotland's economy and its national identity, it makes no sense to cut that coverage, nor our award-winning features department. It's understood that there will be a restructuring of remaining staff in the newsroom in the months to come. The current cuts come amid a new marketing campaign for the newspaper, which emphasises the importance of specialist reporters to the coverage. The NUJ's Chapel letter draws attention to this. The new advertising campaign for The Scotsman, launched a matter of weeks ago, quotes Robert Burns in boasting that our journalists dare to be honest. So we will be honest with you now. These proposed job cuts, imposed from England with no consultation with Scottish staff, threaten the future of this 207-year-old newspaper we are proud to work for. Nick McGowan-Lowe, the NUJ's national organiser in Scotland, said, National World, under the leadership of David Montgomery, is acting like a company incapable of forming a coherent business strategy, making short-term and short-sighted decisions about the careers of hard-working journalists from their comfortable boardroom in London. Staff at The Scotsman have been set targets and have repeatedly been told by their editor that they have achieved them. Despite this, many talented, experienced and dedicated journalists are set to lose their jobs, and the real losers are the Scottish public, who look set to lose the quality, in-depth coverage and exclusives that keep readers entertained, voters informed, and holds politicians of all parties to account. The National has approached National World for comment. An article written by Gregor Young. The National Politics on Wednesday, the 14th of August. Scottish Government is left with no choice but to end universal fuel payments. An article written by Ross Hunter. The Scottish Government has been left with no choice but to end universal fuel payments due to UK plans to means test the winter fuel payment in England and Wales. Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville has confirmed that the Scottish Government has no alternative but to replicate the decision in Scotland and to restrict payments to pensioners who received eligible benefits. Ms Somerville said, despite all efforts to review our financial position, we've been left with no choice but to follow the UK Government and restrict payments to older people who receive relevant eligible benefits. This is a necessary decision when faced with such a deep cut to our funding and in the most challenging financial circumstances since devolution. The reduction we're facing amounts to as much as 90% of the cost of Scotland's replacement benefit, the pension age winter heating payment. Given the UK government's decision to restrict payments to those in receipt of means-tested benefits, such as pension credit, and the implications for the Scottish Government detailed above, I've urged the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to undertake a benefit take-up campaign for pension credit and to move forward with plans for a social energy tariff. Both of these measures will provide some further protection to energy customers in greatest need. Cuts to the payment initiated by the UK Government are set to reduce the block grant adjustment associated with the payment by an estimated £140 to £160 million in 2024-2025. That amounts to nearly 90% of the cost of the Scottish Government's new replacement benefit, the Pension Age Winter Heating Payment. The launch of the Pension Age Winter Heating Payment will now be deferred to 2025-2026, with ministers saying that the timing of the UK Government's changes mean that it's not possible for the Scottish Government to make changes at such a late stage. An article written by Ross Hunter. The National News on Wednesday the 14th of August. Firm fined £360,000 after worker has his fingers cut off. An article written by Rebecca Newlands. A multinational food company has been fined more than £300,000 after one of its workers lost 4 fingers on his right hand while unblocking a machine at a site in Glasgow. The 39-year-old was working on a mixer at Kerry Ingredients in Hillington when the horror incident unfolded on August the 4th, 2021. Used to manufacture dry seasoning blends and mixes, the machine began to develop a blockage and the employee tried to clear it by inserting his right hand into it. As he did so, he came into contact with the rotating blades, which resulted in 4 of his fingers being severed. He has since had to relearn to do everything with his left hand since the traumatic experience. An investigation by the Health and Safety Executive found that the machine had no fixed guards preventing access to the blades from the underside. It also found that there were not any interlocked guards, which would stop the rotating part if any component on the underside of the mixer was to be removed. Kerry Ingredients UK Limited of Bradley Road, Bristol, pleaded guilty on July the 26th to a contravention of the Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations 1988 and the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. At a further hearing on August the 8th, the company was fined £360,000. The Health and Safety Executive has deemed the incident avoidable if only the correct safety measures were in place, and has warned that they will take action against any companies that do not uphold the standards required. Principal Inspector Hazel Dobbs said, "This incident could so easily have been avoided by simply carrying out correct control measures and safe working practices. Companies should be aware that the Health and Safety Executive will not hesitate to take appropriate enforcement action against those that fall below the required standards." An article written by Rebecca Newlands.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and to tell your friends about our service.